Good evening, short story writers. Today, the news item that we're looking at it led me down a little breadcrumb trail to the news that certain groups of people are forming their own little savings cliques. And that is a result of high rents in certain cities and the uncertainty of income and jobs going forward. So, this prompted me to think that perhaps this is the start of an era where people have a different relationship with their money. Up until now, I think that we have been encouraged to be consumers, and in fact, I think a lot of people they don't need a lot of encouragement, but there are other people who have been encouraged to buy things that they really, really don't need. And there's a ton of stuff available to buy, which, quite frankly, is not necessary, not even desirable. However, false desires are projected upon us, and we feel that this whole fear of missing out is preyed upon, so that people buy things they don't really need. A case in point would be the stockpiling of toilet rolls. I know that's a bit of a stretch because people do need toilet rolls. However, it's an example of fear of missing out insofar as everybody began to panic because they thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to not have enough toilet rolls in 6 months' time, even though the shops at the time were saying you don't need to do this. And the shops were rather slow in avoiding selling these things, perhaps for predictable reasons, because they wanted to make a profit, didn't they? And if it's on the shelves, they want to sell it and they don't care who buys it. That is not the point here. The point for tonight's story prompt is, what if the majority of people began to live, let's say, cautiously? I don't want to use the word frugally, although you could take it down that path if you want, but prudently. So, what if they went back to the days when our antecedents would have encouraged us to this practice? Basically, you draw out your money at the beginning of the week or the month and you put it in envelopes, and each envelope is designated. So there'd be a food envelope, there'd be a gas and an electricity envelope, there'd be an envelope for public transport if you're fuel for the car, etc., etc., etc. And anything left over would be put aside for a rainy day. So plastic, which is most people's rainy day fund, is avoided. And perhaps people in your fiction become less blasé about I'm going to pick a figure out the 25% interest, compound interest, that they've been paying on credit cards, so that this would have obviously a knock-on effect on the economy. But that wouldn't be the point for, well, I suppose if you were writing a sociological type of fiction, then it would. But I want you to consider possibly the effect on individuals in your stories. This would mean that there might be an increase in the number of thrift shops and charity stores, Goodwill stores, I believe they're called in America. I'm not sure what they're called in Canada, or in non-English speaking cultures, but we call them charity shops. So, comedy. There would be a certain amount of Oh, sorry, I said I'm going to leave that out because I can't write comedy, so I'm sure there must be some way of getting comedic effects of people being miserable because they can't have their favorite caviar or something, I don't know, or their favorite luxury cheese, which is essentially normal cheese but wrapped in wax or something like that. People not relishing having to recycle things or upcycle. Well, I suppose there'll be some comedic thing in upcycling things in a tacky sort of way. Literary fiction, well, it's happening. It's just a matter of taking it further down the consequences path and writing about what happens to your protagonists. Romance, well, if it's about two people meeting, they could meet over, like in Serendipity, fighting over a pair of gloves, or was it socks? I can't remember. Or they could meet while donating to a thrift shop, or they could meet in a thrift shop. Sci-fi, fantasy, surreal, and horror. If people are, how about they go to a thrift shop to buy a vase, and they find that the vase contains ashes. In the case of fantasy, sci-fi, and surreal and horror, and the ashes. It's implausible, I know, because the charity store would normally check the contents and make sure that they're hygienic. But for the sake of your story, and the ashes are some entity or other, and it comes back to life. In the case of sci-fi, it could be that they get some gadget from a charity store, and they dislodge something with a knock, and it turns out, I don't know, thinking off the top of my head, it can receive transmissions from outer space, and it turns out that they aren't random fragments of the beginning of the universe, the X-ray, the wow flutter. Gosh, brain's not working tonight. Sorry about this, but anyway, it turns out that somebody's a cryptologist, and they work out that in fact there's a code here, and that computers have missed, but our hero, he or she, does not miss it. Historical, well, if you want to make it historical, you could set this during the days of some major crisis where people had to thrift. I would imagine that either of World War One or World War Two would have been a case in point. Political, well, I suppose there could be politicians, green politics. They could be a certain amount of clash between them as they gain in popularity, because the shift in mindset leads to a rise in their popularity, and in some countries political rivals are not tolerated easily, so it could be a political thriller which would lead to crime, mystery, and thrillers. People being a mystery or crime. Okay, so the thing that you buy is in fact it's been stolen and sold on using the marketplace feature on Facebook and or Craigslist or something like that, and somebody comes looking for it and they are not inclined to be reasonable. Okay, 9 minutes and 18. I've gone on rather a lot, I'm so sorry. Okay, so get writing and have fun with that. Or basically just have that as the background to whatever story, that there's a certain amount of thrift, so there are shortages, or that the person who is one of the characters is unwilling to do certain things because it goes against their principles of not being frugal. Okay, good night and best of luck with that one.